Welcome, everyone, to the Iliac Bay. Here in the heart of the province of High Rock, in the land of Tamriel, we're about to embark on a journey the likes of which will never occur again. So come, join us as we hunt down and divulge the various Easter eggs hidden away in the timeless classic CRPG, The Elder Scrolls II: Daggerfall. Up first, we have the 8 divines of the Tamrielic religion. Now, I know what you're thinking. Aren't there 9 divines? Well, this was before the introduction of Talos to the Pantheon. And while there are theories about why Talos suddenly appeared with the 3rd installment of Morrowind, that's not what we're here to discuss. Did you know that 7 of the 8 divines are named after beta testers and programmers at Bethesda? It's true. Take, for instance, the divine known as Akatosh. The name itself is a reference to beta tester Lawrence Sidlowski, who liked to sign, also known as the Old Smaug himself, which, when you take the first letter of each word, forms the name, Akatosh. Another reference can be found within the name of the divine known as Arkay, whose sphere is that of the cycle of birth and death. Arkay's name is a reference to one of the original beta testers, Arkay Deutsch, who died in 1998. Moving down the list, we also have the divine Dibella, known as the goddess whose sphere is beauty, love, and affection. She's one of the more popular of the divines amongst players in recent years. However, it should be noted she is named after one of the 4 female beta testers, specifically Mary Jo Dibella. They took her last name and gave it to a divine whose sphere makes you wonder what they thought of her. Was she exceptionally beautiful in their eyes? Who knows? I couldn't find a picture of her, or most of the others on this list. But we're getting off course here, so let's look at the other divines. Up next we have Julianos, the divine whose sphere is that of wisdom and logic. He's often associated with magic and magic users. The perfect divine to be a reference to the project leader of both the Elder Scrolls I Arena and the Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall, Julian Le Fay, who is very much the father of the Elder Scrolls franchise and a huge fan of tabletop RPGs such as Dungeons and Dragons. Following that, we have Mara, the divine whose sphere is that of love, fertility, agriculture, and compassion. This Adric being is named after another female beta tester of the group, specifically Marilyn Wasserman. Next is Stendarr, the divine whose sphere is that of mercy, charity, well-earned luck, and justice. Stendarr is named after beta tester Daniel Starr. And finally, we have Zenithar, the divine whose sphere is that of work and commerce. He's named after the Elder Scrolls I Arena beta tester, Stephen Zen Zep. The divines, however, are not the only ones to have references hidden away in their names. Their Daedric counterparts, along with other minor deities and characters in the world of Tamriel, also contain references to historic figures and gods, as well as beta testers and designers who worked on the Daggerfall project. For instance, take Boethiah, the Daedric Prince of Plots. They're named after a historic Roman senator by the name of Boethius. Molag Bal, on the other hand, was originally named Molag Bal. This name refers to the Canaanite deities Moloch and Baal. Moloch is a deity who is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible several times, and his worship is and was heavily condemned. This is due mostly and in part to his worship practices involving human sacrifice. Baal, on the other hand, is related to a deity deemed false by the Hebrew faith, specifically the ancient Mesopotamian and Canaanite fertility god Hadad. Fertility gods are also often related to the concept of, among other things, childbirth, pregnancy, and sex. Meanwhile, Moloch has an etymological root with the word milk, which means to rule. Molag Bal seeks to bring all mortal life under his sway and enslave it to his ends. His spheres are extensions or perversions of what his inspirations stood for, making these two references perfect matches for the Daedric Prince of rape, domination, and the enslavement of mortals. On a lighter note, we have Sheogorath. Sheogorath is the Daedric Prince whose sphere is that of madness and creativity. This greater Daedra was named after Ted Peterson, lead designer for the Daggerfall project, and a writer for other Elder Scrolls games. The name Sheogorath was specifically based on his full first name, Theodore. And now, moving on to the first of the minor characters and deities of the Elder Scrolls franchise, we have Ebonarm. Ebonarm is the alter ego of beta tester Raymond Whit Crowley, who also wrote the in-game text known as the Ebonarm. Next, we have the legendary immortal Breton wizard of the Second Era, Gyron Vardengroet. Gyron was prophesied by the gods as a champion that would be sent down to guide others and bring wisdom. His exploits would earn him the titles of the Sage and Great Sage. He's the main figure of the in-game lore text, the Sage, and his name is a reference to one of the writers for the Elder Scrolls franchise, namely Gyron Vardengroet. And now we move on to a minor character who, in the base game, is only referenced but never met. Specifically, Nulfaga's dragon familiar, Skakmat. Now, originally Skakmat was meant to be a much bigger part of the story, and thus not a minor character. With the final version of the game, he is relegated to a background character, whose impact was mostly felt during the prologue, before the player even arrives in the Iliac Bay. His name is a reference to his role, as Skakmat is the Danish word for checkmate. In the prologue, Skakmat, at the behest of Nulfaga, casts a fog over the battlefield where the army of the Kingdom of Daggerfall was facing off against the army of the Kingdom of Sentinel. This was done to allow Gosred to kill Lysandus' impersonator in order to feign his death, but it also resulted in the death of King Cameron of Sentinel. The actions of Skakmat in the end ultimately facilitated the death of a king, much like a chess piece being part of a checkmate on a chessboard. For the first of the minor deities on this list, however, we have Ephen and Phen. Ephen is a minor deity who is known as the God of the Wild, while Phen is thought to be related to the hero god of the Somerset Isles, Benaster. The names of both deities are believed to be references to beta testers Stephen Corejwo and Stephen Wilkinson. Up next, we have the lesser-known minor deity of Colwyn. Little is known about this god, except that he is associated with those in pursuit of lore. He's worshipped in the Iliac Bay area exclusively, and shrines can be found to him there. His name, however, is thought to be a reference to beta tester Larry W. Olson. Now, I didn't know this was considered a minor deity, due to how prevalent he's become in recent lore. But Jephre, otherwise known to the Bosmer as Jephre, was originally named Jephre. This is a reference to beta tester Jeff Grulich. And finally, for our minor deities, we have Secunda and Masser, the two moons of Tamriel. These two are also known as Joan and Jode, respectively, in the Khajiit pantheon. Their Khajiit names of Joan and Jode, on the other hand, are, respectively, a reference to beta testers Joan McCone and Judy Weller. But surely these are not the only references present in the game, right? Well, there are a few more we've managed to uncover in the course of our search. For instance, did you know that the quote-unquote random name generation for the game is not entirely random? It's true. There's several references to characters from literature, mythology, religious figures, and even references to other cultures that can be found in the name generator's outputs. For example, Dark Elves, otherwise known as Dunmer, can end up with the name Lilith, which is a reference to Jewish mythology. Dark Elves also have the names Casper, Golgotha, and Tabitha in their name pool. These are references to Christian mythology specifically. They also have a reference to medieval British mythology with the name Avalon. The Khajiit have references to Islamic mythology with the names Akbar, Fatima, Mohammed, Omar, and Shahrazad. But they also have a reference to Babylonian history in their pool of names, with the name Hammurabi. This is a reference to the historic figure Hammurabi, who famously came up with the Code of Hammurabi. Wood Elves, otherwise known as Bosmer, and the Argonians as well, have references to ancient Greece in their pool of names, with names like Cassandra, Androcles, Aphrodite, Artemis, Athena, Heracles, Perseus, Theodorus, and Macedonia. Wood Elves also have references to the Lord of the Rings in their name pool, with names like Aragorn and Legolas. The Bretons, like Dark Elves, also have references to medieval British mythology, with names like Guinevere, Morgana, Tristane, Tristan, and Ysolda. And finally, the High Elves, or Altmer, have clear references to the Lord of the Rings in their names, with names like Gandalf, Mithril, Saruman, and Sauron appearing in their available name pool. This is not the end of the literary references, however. There are quite a few more present in the Iliac Bay. For instance, the in-game text, the Book of Circles, written by the warrior Hunding, is an allusion to the Book of Five Rings, written by historical Japanese swordsman Miyamoto Musashi. Miyamoto Musashi was famed as the victor of dozens of duels at an early age and wrote the book late in his life as a practical guide to combat and continued Way of the Sword. He would eventually settle down and live on a lord's estate for some time before retiring to a mountaintop shrine in his final years to write and meditate. This is similar to the in-game historic figure Hunding's time as a hermit after the age of 30. The Red Guard's reverence for Hunding is very similar to Musashi's popularity in Japan even centuries after his death. His style of swordsmanship is, in fact, still taught in schools, not unlike the Red Guard's art of sword singing. The False Notes from the Mages Guild quest Research Notes contains the phrase, "The end result is a quasi-horizontal conolith composed of anastomosing ductiliths, whose distal ends curl like a harpolith, sin like a sphenolith, or bulge discordantly like an acmolith or ethmolith," which is the description of a geological feature known as a cactolith. This particular description first appeared in the real-life text Geology and Geography of the Henry Mountains region, Utah, a survey and restudy of one of the classic areas of geology by Charles Butler Hunt. Charles Butler Hunt is notable among geologists for being the first to coin that phrase. Personally, I think it's an overcomplication of a relatively simple concept. A cactolith is quite simply a laccolith that looks like a cactus. Now, isn't that much simpler to comprehend than whatever that garbled mess of overly loquacious verbiage was? But I digress. We're getting off on a tangent. Let's get back to the Easter eggs. Up next, we have the Madness of Pelagius. This in-game text shares many similarities to the play The Madness of George III in both name and contents. While Pelagius III's madness mirrors George III's madness in many ways, Pelagius living out the last of his days in the Temple of Kinnereth is extremely reminiscent of George living out the last of his in Kew Palace. And finally, for our last series of Easter eggs, we have Nulfaga's literary quotes. In Nulfaga's dialogue, there are several references to classical literature. For instance, united thoughts and counsels, equal hope, and hazard in the once glorious enterprise. Joined with me once, now misery hath joined, in equal ruin, is an excerpt of a much longer but well-known and popular line from John Milton's book, Paradise Lost. On the other hand, choosing out few words most horrible, let none them read. Verses frame which whiz and other spells like terrible curses is taken from The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser. Say what strange motive goddess could compel is meanwhile taken from The Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope. And finally, we are only like dead walls or vaulted graves is an excerpt from The Duchess of Malfi by John Webster. And with that, we're all out of time for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more exciting content. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and a happy Elder Scrolls month. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.